If we can perhaps agree about anything about Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, it's that writer-director Rian Johnson really did craft a film that is nearly impossible to review well, spoiler-free. So I am sorry, but this is not the spoiler-free review that you were looking for. If you have not seen this film, I would beseech you, click away, go watch the film, but if you have, settle in and let's discuss. Now, it is risky, incredibly risky, trying to make a film that does something different and does something new, especially in a world where a film like The Force Awakens, which made close to $1 billion domestically, really did find much of its success through playing it safe and attempting to make something that the audience would find familiar and nostalgic. And it's even more dangerous attempting to elaborate on specific elements of a beloved franchise, especially ones that many viewers have come to conclude are unchanging or without nuance. For example, at a surface glance, many viewers might have surmised that the Jedi have only ever been presented as the pure heroes of the Star Wars universe, making it feel downright blasphemous to insinuate anything different. Or going purely off what we've been shown previously, a lot of fans may have concluded that the Force is only strong enough to lift rocks, X-Wings, lightsabers, or shoot lightning out of one's fingertips. Meaning that if a Force wielder were to, say, use it to fly through outer space or cast their astroform across the galaxy, that would be ludicrous. But even for someone like me, someone who fully believes that the prequels have already demonstrated just how fallible and nuanced the Jedi were, or that the television shows The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels have already shown us just how powerful the Force could be, even so, I would still applaud the aforementioned creative choices found in The Last Jedi. Why? Because without a willingness to make decisions like them, we would have never gotten a film as weird, risky, bold, and brilliant as The Empire Strikes Back. We would have gone back to Tatooine instead of Hoth, the Death Star instead of Cloud City, hung out with Ghost Obi-Wan instead of Yoda, gotten to know Wedge Antilles more instead of introduced Lando Calrissian, and never, ever revealed that the most evil villain in all of the galaxy actually is our hero's dad. If those risks weren't taken, those new places not explored, and those new ideas never presented, we would have lost. Storytelling would have lost. The filmmakers merely struggling to recreate what was once fresh, exciting, and new, only to discover that in the recycling it had lost much of its brilliance and enchantment. With that said, it is not enough to simply do something different for the sake of doing something different, especially if that somehow unjustifiably robs a story, an idea, or a character of their established essence, which is what, in my opinion, made nearly every twist and turn in Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi so incredibly wonderful. So let's start by talking about which of those fresh angles worked best, that being every blessed scene between Ben Solo and Rey from nowhere. Honestly, ever since Kylo Ren removed his helmet in The Force Awakens, revealing himself to be nothing more than this petulant boy who desperately longed for the same kind of control, power, respect, and attention that he believed his grandfather had once possessed, I loved that character. A love and empathy that only grew watching this film each time he was insulted by Snoke, unbalanced after the death of his father, conflicted whether or not to destroy his mother, and incrementally more unsure each time he connected with Rey. And to watch that relationship build to the point in Snoke's throne room where he felt compelled to hold out his hand to Rey, begging her to join him, it really was just this perfect climactic moment for that character in this film, as it more wholly revealed his brokenness, confusion, evil, and, as Luke described it, his youthful fear. In that moment, we saw that he was still that same scared boy that Luke had stood over with his ignited green lightsaber, desperately reaching out for what had been denied him his entire life, from his parents and then his master, that being an accepting, sincere, loving, and lasting connection to others. And that it was Rey that he held his hand out to felt so very appropriate for that character as well. This girl who also longed to be seen as valuable and worth returning to, which was part of what made this film's reveal that her parents were nobodies so much more than just a surprise twist. No, Johnson was using that specific narrative development and character choice choice to make a statement, one that perfectly connected to the rest of the film, because in a lot of ways, this film really was about the passing of the baton. From the past to the present, the old to the new, the known to the unknown. As such, it made complete sense that we were no longer just following the Skywalker bloodline through Ben Solo, but also following this girl who had no connection whatsoever to the story that we'd followed for the last 7 films. Nope, not Luke's daughter, not Obi-Wan's granddaughter, and not Anakin reincarnate. Just a girl from nowhere, just as quote-unquote insignificant as that little boy with the broom on Canto Bight. So yes, Johnson did a very solid job handling a number of the new elements, but how about the way that he handled some of the old elements? How about the way that he dealt with my favorite character in the Star Wars universe, Luke Skywalker? Well, let me start by saying he had a nearly impossible task. After all, how do you continue the story of a character that's already had a beginning, middle, and end in a way that fans of that character will respond to? Well, one way, which is probably the safer way, is to have that character revert, unlearning what they learned, shedding their maturation, and returning to a state that the audience already knows and loves, much like Han Solo in The Force Awakens. But what Johnson did with Luke Skywalker in Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, was not only much riskier, but also much more respectful to what had come previously, as it built atop not only the lessons that he had learned and the experiences that he had had, but the overall messages communicated in the previous 7 installments. Indeed, chronologically, we were shown Anakin failing due to his unwillingness to relinquish control, followed by Obi-Wan and Yoda ultimately triumphing by letting go and trusting the Force. A lesson that Luke himself learned by the end of Return of the Jedi, as he threw away his own lightsaber, trusted the Force, and consequently showed his father how a true Jedi should act. So then, if Luke's arc in episodes 4 through 6 was to have him ultimately acknowledge that the way to defeat evil was not to simply strike it down with all of his might with a laser sword, it would have been an undoing of that lesson to have him reignite the green against his enemy once more in this film. And to really bring that point home, Johnson actually showed us what would happen if he did: the creation of Kylo Ren. As such, it was just a wonderfully fitting conclusion for the character to have Jedi Master Luke Skywalker, like his masters before him, trust the Force, set aside control, and ultimately become one with that all-connecting power. And let me tell you, I cannot wait to see what my favorite character will do as a Force ghost in Star Wars Episode 9. But it wasn't just through Luke that Johnson presented that message in The Last Jedi, but really through all 3 of the plot lines. For the first 3/4 of this film, we watched Rey struggle to bring Luke physically back into the fight, Rose and Finn fight to save the day by finding some expert codebreaker, and Poe wrestle with Vice Admiral Hodo for control of the Resistance fleet. Struggles that all came to naught. Speaking of cohesive storytelling, let's talk about Supreme Leader Snoke, a character whose handling I was initially rather torn up about. After all, we really weren't told much of anything about him. Yes, we saw the outpourings of his power, but weren't ever really shown where it came from. And yes, we understood his desire to oppress the galaxy, but never really told why. And after his death, I was only left to assume that we never really would get those answers, unless some novel or television show further elaborated. But then I realized I could have said pretty much the exact same thing about Emperor Palpatine after Return of the Jedi. After all, he was mentioned in Star Wars Episode 4, we saw a hologram of him in Star Wars Episode 5, and then we did see him bodily in Episode 6, but we weren't really told any of his backstory. We didn't learn his first name, where his power came from, why he really wanted the things that he wanted. He was just there, and then he died. More than anything, he was there to serve the arcs of the lead character, those being Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. And in the exact same way, if we see Snoke as a piece in Ben Solo's character arc, his handling makes so much more sense, and the how and why of his untimely demise actually incredibly exciting. Because what better way to demonstrate Ben's power, cunning, and drive than to have him best his seemingly more powerful master? And what better way to set him apart from his grandfather than to have him do so before his trilogy's final film? Characters weren't the only thing that Johnson handled well in his Star Wars film, though. He also assembled some exhilarating action sequences, and in this day and age of special effects extravaganzas, it's rather easy for a director to turn over an entire action sequence to his pre-visualization team, asking them to come up with a number of really cool shots, which he will then attempt to assemble later in the final edit. That, however, did not seem to be the case with The Last Jedi's aerial dogfights. The opening sequence, especially with the intergalactic bombers, was particularly well handled, possessing a beautiful ebb, flow, build, climax, and catharsis. I also must take a moment to praise Rian Johnson's camera work, which in a lot of ways was rather different to what we'd seen in previous Star Wars films. This director absolutely loves the close-ups, which he used to brilliant ends, really accenting key emotional moments, as well as highlighting the emotional landscape of his characters' faces. Which isn't to say that Mr. Johnson doesn't know how to compose a beautiful establishing shot of an environment or an immaculate wide shot of a lightsaber battle. Now, of course, this film wasn't perfect, and indeed no film ever is, but one of the main issues I had with it was just with balance and pace. Unfortunately, in attempting to accomplish so much, introducing so many characters, so many plot threads, and ever maintaining these huge stakes, the film did lose some of its drive, focus, and urgency as it went along. As Johnson sought to balance all of those elements, I found that he ended up undercutting the emotional effectiveness of many crucial moments, as well as dragged down the pace throughout. For example, that the Resistance fleet remained just out of range of the First Order ships for more than an hour of this film, never deviating course or visibly altering their strategy, turned what started out as a very tense plotline into something rather undramatic. Connected to that, as delightfully unique and visually inspired as the Canto Bight sequence was, it couldn't help but feel just slightly unfocused and disconnected from the rest of the film, as much as I really love the lessons that Rose taught Finn in that place, and the way that DJ played into the ex-Stormtrooper's growth, helping him to finally believe that there is good worth running to, not just evil to run from. In context, that arc, those characters, and that location too often just felt like an unfortunate distraction from more riveting plot lines. Looking at the film as a whole, I will say too, Rian did seem to want his cake and to eat it too, dare I say greedily gobbling up more storyline than was necessary for this middle chapter, and ultimately pushing things beyond what could have been the natural cliffhanging conclusion that would likely have felt appropriate for a middle chapter of a Star Wars trilogy. Which does make me feel slightly bad for J.J. Abrams, who will be writing and directing Star Wars Episode 9. I mean, really, where do you go from here? Which, at the same time, is also incredibly exciting. The sky is the limit. The entire galaxy is the limit. At the end of the day, I really liked The Last Jedi. It loved Star Wars enough to not simply try and repeat what had come previously, and it loved me as a fan enough to give me something new to fall in love with afresh. It's disheartening then to hear criticisms like porgs were only invented to sell toys, or this entire franchise is just a product of consumerism, or entertainment needs have pushed this story so far beyond its prime, it's not even funny. Now, it's not that those opinions are wrong or even bad to voice, but when they're blasted out into the echo chamber of the internet, it unfortunately stops good, real discussion in its tracks, dismissing completely the idea that maybe, just maybe, the filmmakers behind this film were endeavoring to simply, powerfully, and cohesively use this story, these characters, and these creatures, yes, even porgs, to say something. Something to the old generation and something to the new. And for all these reasons, I will give the film a 4 out of 5 and a heart. I would still love to know what you guys thought of the film, though, so definitely comment below and let me know. And if you would, could you rank for me the episodic Star Wars films? I'd be very curious to see where this one lands in your lineup. Finally, please do subscribe. I'm going to continue to review films and television on this channel, and I would love for you to stay up to date on all of those things. But for now, I'm Chris Hartwell. This is The Heartbeat. Thank you for joining me.